welcome back to the Exchange Podcast. And before we get started, there's something I want to read. It's from the Maumelle Fraternal Order of Police, and a guest that we've had on here twice, Sergeant Michael Murphy. I just want to read something a statement that they made. It says, "Meet Sergeant Michael Murphy. Sergeant Murphy is married and has 3 children, ages 10, 7, and 2. Sergeant Murphy was diagnosed with ALS 3 days after his 37th birthday, which caused him to medically retire from the Maumelle Police Department very early. He explains this as a gut-wrenching feeling, unlike anything I had ever experienced. What about my children, my wife, my future?" Sergeant Murphy spent some time in the Army before joining the UAMS Police Department in 2017. Sergeant Murphy was then promoted to corporal in October 2018. Sergeant Murphy made the switch to the Maumelle Police Department in March of 2019. During his time at the MPD, he was a certified hostage negotiator, field training officer, SWAT certified, serving on the Special Response Team, and a detective. Sergeant Murphy was issued life-saving awards in December 2019 and in September of 2020. He was promoted to sergeant in January of 2023, which he says was just the start of his career aspirations before he was diagnosed. He genuinely enjoys helping people and is an active member in his church and community. Now it's our turn to help him. We would appreciate any and all donations to help our fellow officer. Stay tuned. We will also be announcing fundraiser ideas, in which case we are going to post that. As I've said, he has been a guest on this podcast, and I can vouch that he is an active member in his church. And he's he's been one of our favorite guests on here, just by our audience response thus far. We will be posting that in the link below wherever you listen to your podcasts at. You will be able to find it. There will be ways to give to help support. He's having some issues with the insurance company that he's dealing with. They're not. There's just a lot of issues going on, and we'll probably have him back on, let him explain a little bit of that. But there'll be ways to give through Cash App and through Venmo. But today, it is an honor to have another guest here. It is Robert. Can you say your last name?
Mclendon.
Okay, Robert Mclendon. That is our co-host, JaVaughn. That is his dad. And thank you for being on the podcast. Welcome to the Exchange Podcast. If you would, tell us a little bit about yourself. Introduce yourself to the audience.
Well, my name is Robert Mclendon, and I grew up in Southern California, Los Angeles to be exact, and South Central to be exact. And, I was there for 19 years, went through the motions. There's a lot to my testimony as far as being down there in L.A. But then through a course of events, I wound up in Northern California. That's where I met my wife and got married, of course, through a few more events, up and downs. We've had some ins and outs, and now we are, we had gotten a divorce, and we were divorced for about 6 years, and then we got back together and got remarried, and have been remarried now for about 12, 13 years.
That's interesting. That's interesting. That's a story of redemption that you don't really hear about a lot. I've known of one other case that did that, where they stayed separated. I mean, how did that work out, if you don't mind me asking? What kind of brought that back together?
God. Absolutely.
Short answer.
It had nothing to do with anything that I had done or she had done. It was just circumstances that kind of brought us back together and put us in a situation where, we wound up at the same place at the same time. And through multiple conversations and returning to that place, and just, God allowed us to have some conversations that led us back to the point where we could actually communicate with each other. Because when we broke up, we could not communicate with each other, in most cases. And so
which probably led to the breakup.
Yeah. And so once we got back together, we vowed to communicate in everything, all things, no matter what, which has led us to our relationship today, which has blossomed to a point where I had never known that I could actually love someone
Wow.
or be with someone as much as I am with my wife now. And before I could not do that.
I can attest to that.
Yeah.
As his son, coming into this, I was wondering, what am I going to talk to about with my dad? But I forget that one of the easiest people I could talk to is my father.
Mm-hmm.
And both him and my mom, especially my mom, have grown immensely, exponentially since they got remarried. I've never seen them communicate as well when I was a child right now. And one of the things that you could see it is in all of their children. All of us, even as adults, take after them, are able to say there is something there, and it is the Holy Spirit. It's God working through that. So when you were in Southern California, we here on the podcast, we talk about real life events pertaining to politics and just any pop culture whatnots. And this is definitely something Mom was curious about how we were going to go about this, but you are black. Let's get this out of the way.
I am.
Yeah.
No one told me.
Right.
That's what the exchange is all about. Revelation.
There you go. The idea of what a black man, especially a black man, goes through is, around the time you were growing up, you had the I'm blanking on his name. Why can't we all get along?
Rodney King.
Rodney King.
Yeah.
You lived through that.
I was actually there.
Yeah. So tell us a bit about that, just so people understand the context.
The beginning of the Rodney King riots actually happened right in the middle of my neighborhood, where I grew up at.
I remember watching that on TV.
Yeah. It was, at the time, I can tell you I felt exactly the same way the rest of the people in that city did.
Mm-hmm.
It was heart-wrenching. It was kind of degrading to see something like that on national TV happen to a man and nothing be done about it.
Right.
You know what I mean? So it was very difficult to watch and live in that moment.
Mm-hmm.
And I actually at the time was on the streets, and I involved myself in those riots and did all those things, and and I won't shy away from that, because at the moment that's the way I felt. But at the same time, at the end of the day, when it was all said and done, after the riots, we're almost to the end of the riots, and you could stand in the middle of the street and you look down the street and you see all the buildings burned down, and you see all the chaos in the city. That's when my heart broke.
Right.
And that's when I kind of got an understanding of what are we doing to ourselves?
Mm-hmm.
Because no one else was living in that city but us.
Right.
No one really cared. I mean, you saw the people on top of their establishments with guns and shooting back, and all that. I mean, it was something to see, and I lived through that, thank God, because a lot of people didn't. A lot of people didn't, and it was a shame what happened. And I look back and I feel a certain type of way when it comes to that kind of reaction to a situation. My whole lifestyle and the things I think about now and how I would handle things nowadays is totally different. So of course I've grown up, but a lot of people haven't. Mm-hmm. And which is sad. But as a young man at that time, all I could think about was that could have been me.
Sure.
Yeah, that's interesting that you said some people haven't grown up. I think the easiest one to go to is the Kyle Rittenhouse situation up north. From here, I should say. Mm-hmm. Up north from here and in Wisconsin. When you watch something like that, because his whole thing was, I went to go protect my neighborhood. As a father of 5 boys, how do you see you reacting as a parent if, say, I or Jalen or Michael or one of us just said, I need to, at that age, 17, just things are popping off. I guess more equivalent would be Titus and Trey because they're the younger ones. How would you go about dealing with that? What would you say to a young man who wants to do that?
Well, first of all, at that age, just like I was, but I wasn't, I was a little bit older than that. Well, 18, 19 years old, 20 years old, something like that. But as a father, I would not want my son to put himself in that position.
Right.
I would not want him to go down someplace where he is not currently at to try to defend something that he should have left to law enforcement. That's just my idea.
Sure.
But being in that situation as he was, by all means, I don't shy away from the fact that he defended himself.
Sure.
When you're in that situation. But as a dad, I wouldn't want my sons to put themselves in that situation. And I would try to communicate that to them or talk to them or even try to stop them to a certain extent.
Did you have did you kind of have opportunity to say anything like when the George Floyd situation happened, kind of reflecting back on the Rodney King issue? As far as saying that, telling someone, hey, this is not going to end well.
Yeah, well, I definitely knew that wasn't going to end well. And like I said before, from just me being in the, riots with the Rodney King thing, I knew where it could go. And I knew where it can go, and I knew what it can do to a city, individuals or whatnot. And I didn't agree with it at all,
right,
by any means. I did not agree with us as a people, as black people, going out and destroying things of our own in our own communities, in our own areas, just to try to prove a point to someone who really didn't care about that area.
Absolutely.
And I think there's better ways of getting your message across than violence and chaos.
Well, let me ask, because here was kind of my assessment, and I think because we discussed this, not as that was going on, but we did discuss this on this podcast a while back. And the way kind of my view of it, as everyone watched, especially with George Floyd, because when Rodney King happened, I was maybe 11, 12 years old, and I can remember seeing all that. When George Floyd, when that happened, I remember that it seemed like, most Americans, regardless of what your race was, agreed this was egregious, something had to be done. But as it went on, my take on it was that you had these, they were not homegrown movements. Antifa is not a homegrown movement. BLM is not a homegrown movement.
No, it isn't.
And they are Marxist at the very core. And it seems like that they are pushed into the very, they're almost spearheaded, if you will, to start these situations where we are united. Hey, this is wrong. This has to be rectified. It is there to just divide us.
Absolutely. I agree that those situations keep us divided. It keeps us divided because a lot of people who are in those situations aren't educated enough to know that you don't go down this road and expect everyone to follow you. You know what I mean? So it's like you're going to come across people. And the biggest thing, like I've learned in my marriage, the biggest thing about people nowadays is communication. No one knows how to communicate with each other. And it's either my way or the highway.
Absolutely.
I got these are my thoughts. These are, this is the way I feel. And now we're going off of feelings instead of facts in a lot of situations.
Yes.
And so a lot of these riots are happening. And then you have the people that are taking advantage of these riots. or they can care less.
No.
Whether it goes one way or another, they can care less. All they can see is the fact that we get free stuff.
Yeah.
Which is terrible.
Right.
It's horrible.
Yeah.
I had a question about, because I got out of California, it's been maybe 8 years now, since I went off to college and moved out here and whatnot. Can you give a bit of what the Bay Area is like now versus when, you first moved up to Northern California?
When I first moved up to Northern California, it was beautiful. It was an opportunity. That was almost 30 years ago.
Yeah.
It was, I was coming out of a bad situation, and I don't mind talking about all that stuff here, but I was coming out of a bad situation where I had paroled to Northern California, to be honest with you. My mother had moved from Los Angeles to San Jose, and I was in prison for a couple of years, and so I was trying to get away from all the stuff that I knew. I knew that if I were to go back to L.A., in the situation at the time I was 21, 23, something like that, somewhere around there. But at that time in my life, I was not into good stuff. Mm-hmm. And I knew if I went back to L.A., I would either wind up in a casket or wind up behind bars for the rest of my life. And so when I went up to the Bay Area and I met my wife the first day I got up there. And so a lot of it was she, kind of pointed me in a different direction. She, I knew who God was, but I didn't know who God was like she knew who God was. And that kind of helped me direct me into the direction of finding out who God was. Mm-hmm. And so the Bay Area, when I first got there, it was land of opportunity. I saw, a lot of opportunity for me to be able to do different things other than what I have been doing my entire life.
Yeah.
There's
key right there.
Yeah. And so and I wasn't new to traveling or being in a different place. I've done that as a young person when my mom traveled all the time. My mother bowled a lot, so she was in different cities all the time. And, a lot of times I would tag along. I had been to Hawaii a couple of times with her and done all these different things. And so, I knew moving on or going to a different place would change some things, but I had no idea that it would change the things that it changed once I got to the Bay Area. And that's right about the time when the tech industry was just starting up or, started getting bigger and people were getting these massive contracts to come there to work in the Bay Area. And I couldn't believe it. And so I just, opportunity after opportunity. And even though I didn't have the education or the know-how or even the experience in some of these jobs, it was just people, giving me an opportunity to, hey, you want to come learn this, you want to come learn that, yeah, and I accepted it all. I jumped from this place to that place to learn more, and where I'm at now is miles away from my upbringing in Southern California.
So, it really is one of those things where a bad situation, and then you parole to North California, mm-hmm. that really could be, you really can look at that as the providence of God.
Oh, yeah.
Because, like you said, of what you do, and you work in the tech industry, and things were starting to move there. What was kind of the pivotal moment that you realized spiritually you were on the wrong path? I mean, I guess you kind of probably saw that physically you needed to change. Was that did that coincide spiritually, or did the spiritual kind of catch up with the physical?
Okay, so this is something that happened when I was in prison, and it's a situation that happened to me, and I know it was God sent. There was a guy in prison that was there. His name was Big Hearns, and he was this huge 6'9" guy. He was in there for life, and jeez. I had met this guy in prison, and and I'm young, and I'm just getting there, and I only knew a few people that were there from the streets, and I went in there, and he just, for some reason, kind of gravitated towards me and started talking to me and just, hey, help me out or whatever. And he was like, he was like, hey, can you do me a favor? I need you to buy me some commissary at the thing, spend some money on commissary. And, I'm thinking, oh, here we go, when I first get to prison or whatever. And he goes, I'll pay you back, and I'm like, yeah, okay, whatever, you know what I mean? But I'm trying to fill everything out, trying to figure it out. So I do it, you know what I mean? I don't know what else to do. I'm just getting here. This is my first time here. And so I do it. And lo and behold, the next month, he pays me back in full.
Wow.
And I'm like, okay, but then he starts talking to me or whatnot. And then I got into a little situation with some other guys that just say didn't come from the same neighborhood I came from. And so I got into it a little bit with these guys in prison, and it was only like I myself got into it, and I had about two of my buddies homeboys that I grew up with was still there with me. And after I got into this thing, there was a group of guys from BGF, Black Guerrilla Family, and these guys basically were all lifers who traveled from prison to prison, right? They traveled from prison to prison with each other, and and now they're in this prison together. And Big Hearns is the shot caller of the yard, and I was in Avenal, and when I went to Avenal, they were like, this is gladiator school. They were always on lockdown. There was always fights. There was always riots. There was always all this stuff going on in Avenal. So after I got into that little scuffle with this guy, the other guys that hung around Big Hearns was like, "Oh, we thought you were this little punk, and we didn't even want to have nothing to do with you, and we didn't understand why Hearns was talking to you or whatever." But he was like, "But you all right, man? You defended yourself, and and all this stuff." And so for some reason, those guys grabbed me and pulled me in. And so my mindset at that time was all about surviving in LA, all the robberies, all the drugs, all the stuff. Just what could I do to prosper myself? That was my thought process when I got out, going back to LA. And so what happened was, Big Hearns grabbed me and he pulled me to the side and he started telling me, "Hey, I want you to read these books." And I was like, What books? And he was like, well, there's a set of books that I want you to read. And he started giving me a book at a time. So he gave me one book, and the books were Donald Going books. I don't know if you ever have a chance. If you ever have a chance, look them up. They're Donald Going books. And Donald Goings was a black author who wrote a bunch of books, and they were all on pimping, hustling, jewelry heists, drug running, just all kind of stuff, right? And so me as a young guy, when I'm reading this, I'm going, man, this guy was doing the most. He was doing this, doing that. I was like, man, I got all these ideas for when I get out. I'm going to do this, going to do that, going to do this. And so I read a book and gave it back to Hearns, and he was like, hey, what'd you get out of that? And I was like, oh, man, that was good, man. That book was bad. And it was like, okay. So he gave me another. He's like, shook his head, gave me another one. I read about 4 books. Right? And the whole time I'm just getting hyped up every time I read a book. And so the last book I read, he I gave it back to him. He was like, what'd you get out of that? And I was like, oh man, he was like doing this, doing that, or whatever, and it's like, oh man, I got all these ideas of what I'm gonna do. And then he slapped me up the backside of my head, right? Slapped me up the backside of my head, and he goes, you didn't get a thing I was trying to teach you. He said if you read all the books, and then you went through the whole entire thing, he said, at the end of every book, the main character always died. And that messed me up.
Yeah.
And so I sat on my bunk for about 2 weeks after that, just messed up. And that's when I really started thinking that was a spiritual thing. That's when I think God grabbed a hold of me. So after that, I started working out with those guys. I stayed out of trouble. And those guys were like, and they even told me, they like, you're a little different. We're not trying to recruit you. We don't want you to, do this or go back. This is honest to God stories. And they were telling me that, hey, just work out with us. You can work out with us. So I just worked out with them. And I worked out with them until I got out. And because they knew I was going home in a couple of years. So, and man, it worked out to the best, and I so appreciate those guys.
So really, your journey towards Christianity, towards God, really was not through traditional methods.
No.
Yeah, and that's interesting. It's how how God decides to do certain things. It's always, that's what I love about doing this podcast, because there are people that I'm sure that are dealing with some similar situations.
100%.
Going, hey, how can I, how does this work out? And so there's people that this podcast can reach that they may never go to church, but they hear a story like this and they're going, okay, maybe there's hope. There's hope out there.
Yeah.
Yeah, we've had an evangelist, pastors, a cop, and I think you're the most out of left field we've had so far. These are first time for me to hear these stories, and I'm trying not to, be too over exaggerative here, because I want to keep the professionalism. But it is mind boggling, because if I may, and you can jump off of this, my brothers and I never saw that. We never saw that side of life, period, because of how hard, even before the divorce, how hard he worked. Didn't know what Call of Duty or Halo was, because they had guns. Dad was very opposed to guns in the house, and Mom would tell us, well, your dad had a rough upbringing, and he doesn't want you around guns. Right. Oh, man, well, all the other kids are growing up with guns, and you mentioned it. You're from South Central, predominantly black neighborhood. I grew up in a very Hispanic white neighborhood when we first moved to Modesto, California. And, my best friend was white. A couple of other buddies who played football with me were Hispanic. So I didn't know that one could live a life in gangbanging and in prison and all this stuff. And, what was it? Your first son, not like Michael. Michael. What was that feeling of becoming a father for the first time?
Well, that was kind of Michael was kind of a surprise, because Michael was conceived out of a relationship that I had with a woman in Colorado. And at the time that I had Michael, it was before I went to prison, and it was at a time I was running drugs back and forth from LA to Vegas to Colorado. And I had been working with a group of guys from a couple different neighborhoods, and then we all got together and was doing this thing. One guy was doing it already, and so I developed a relationship with a woman out there in Colorado, and to be honest with you, I didn't even know she was pregnant, and to be totally honest with you, I didn't know she was even having Michael, because when she finally told me she was pregnant, she told me that she was getting an abortion. So I was like, okay, and so I wasn't thinking about keeping babies and all that stuff at that age and that time in my life. And so what I did was I sent her some money to have an abortion, but at the same time, she never did it. And I thank God for that.
Yeah.
And so once I did find out that Michael was born, I was kind of thrown back, and I was excited a little bit, but then at the same time I was a little sad because he was in Colorado and I was in California. And then I got out of prison, and after me and my wife had been together for a couple of years, I think about this time Michael was probably about 4 or 5 once I had gotten out. And Michael came out to California one summer, and he stayed with us for the whole entire summer. But at that time, I had already been in a position to be able to take care of Michael, and I had a good job and became like this family man kind of deal or whatnot. And JaVaughn was very young, and so I told my wife, I was like, hey, I think we need to keep him here. And so the first time Michael went back to Colorado, the first year, and then he came back the following summer, and when he came back, he got off the plane and he just looked a mess, And he was like 5 years old at the time. He just looked a mess, and he just wasn't, I felt she wasn't keeping him together, wasn't taking care of him the way he needed to be. So I just told my wife, I was like, hey, we had a conversation, and we decided that we were going to keep him in California. And I just did that. And I said, well, I'm not going to tell her till after the summer. So after the summer was over, I called her up. I go, hey, you know what? You can call a lawyer, you can call the cops, you can call anybody you want to, you can do whatever you need to do, but I'm not sending them back. So we kept him, and then he stayed with us, and she never fought it. She never, she hooped and hollered and did all this other stuff, but she never tried to get me charged or anything else. So Michael grew up in Northern California, and I think it was the best thing for him because she has 2 other kids. And they were older than Michael, and one of them, her daughter, I think has like 9 or 10 kids.
Wow.
And and living that kind of life. And then her other son, who actually came out here for a summer.
Oh yeah.
Denzel.
Yeah.
And he is, he's had some issues. He's in and out of prison himself, and has got some things going on. But we pray for him all the time.
Mm-hmm.
But Michael, the last time he went to Colorado and visited, and then he came back and he thanked us. So that was huge.
Yeah.
And you mentioned the abortion, and today is actually the 1-year anniversary that the Supreme Court kicked that back to the states, and that happened a year ago today. And I remember it was March of 2019. I was still living in Nashville, Tennessee, and we had a tornado that came through in March, and very devastating tornado. And I had to go to a doctor's appointment just for a checkup. And the office where he worked out of had been pretty damaged in that tornado, so he was doing all of his appointments out of the Planned Parenthood. Mm-hmm. And so I was able to keep my appointment, but they told me I had to go to Planned Parenthood. And I kind of found it a little bit comical because anytime you go to Planned Parenthood, you've always got the people that are protesting.
Yeah.
So I go walking in, and I've got these people offering me all these different resources, and I can rethink this. I'm going, I'm not here for what you think I'm here for.
Yeah.
And so but I'm sitting there waiting to see my doctor. And I see this couple come walking out, and she had just had an abortion. Mm-hmm. And for the guy, he's just, it's not even dawned on him.
Not yet.
But for her, I could see the look on her face of what she had just done.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I thought, there's a young lady right there that's going to be traumatized for the rest of her life.
Yeah.
And it's when you listen to the story and how you just told it and how God works things out. Thank God, yeah. It's better we just do not compound more problems on temporary solutions are never solutions. That they never solve anything.
Yeah.
And most of the time we have to work through those. I posted something on Facebook, and I'll say it here. Psalm 23 says, "Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil." My favorite word in that verse is "through," because that word "through" means there is an end inside.
Yeah.
And he's our rod. He's our protector. He's our shepherd. He'll get us through that situation. And when he gets us through that situation, we're going to rejoice in that.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely.
The situation may be rough, but we'll rejoice.
When when you were talking about moving up to Northern California, not many people know this. You met my mom, meaning. Just to give a little background, I was already born at this point. What did my mom do? What did Christy Iversen at the time do? Besides her good looks, because obviously you were madly in love with those. But other than that, you said that she saw God differently than what you could have ever imagined at the time. Mm-hmm. Was it just a simple invitation to church? Was it, just her loving you? And, what was that for you?
It was a combination of both, her loving me and her just her dedication and, regardless of, where we were at and what we were doing or whatnot, just her love for God, regardless of the situation that she, had been in. JaVaughn was, 3 months old when I met her.
Mm-hmm.
She had just had him, you know what I mean? So she had just had him, but, she still, had this overwhelming love for God, and she was, she had been through a lot, because with her, she's adopted as well, and so there's like all this, pain and frustration and things and that she's gone through as well. And I think that's what, kind of gravitated us towards each other, is like we both were going through stuff,
Mm-hmm.
And she didn't, and she didn't know at the time how to accept that. She loved her mom and dad, and so grateful that they chose her and that they, did everything they could to make sure that she was loved and that she was, theirs, and that she was a part of their life or whatnot. But being adopted, I've come to find out that it's still hard.
Yes.
Because you always want to know who the people that made you are.
Right.
Who were they? Who are they? What they're like, or or do I have any other family? Do I have brothers or sisters? Do I have, and those questions, have, I know, gone through her mind over and over again. Even though you have people that love you, when you have that void in your life, something missing in your life, I think that's what kind of gravitated us both to each other. For me, I had a void in my life for just being guided, in different situations in my life. And I had to figure it out from the streets or figure it out on my own. And so, the both of us together, we were learning. And I think that was hard for us in our life at the very beginning. But we were able to overcome some of that. But just her overwhelming love for the Lord no matter what.
Right.
And it continued.
Yeah.
Even during our divorce and even after our divorce. And,
Yep.
didn't matter. She was still going to church.
Mm-hmm.
She could, go out on Saturday night and no matter what, I'm going to church, and then
And so
I'll
you
just
found
continue
that
to grab
out
a
as,
hold of us.
you found that as an inspiration, seeing that, she was able, her faith is what got her through.
Yes, absolutely.
And you mentioning, I had I worked at a church in Tupelo, Mississippi years ago, and I remember an individual there told me, and he had been adopted, and I remember him saying, the parents that adopted him were his parents. He said, never any question.
Right. Yeah.
He said, but there was always that question, why did they give me up? And I think that's what a lot of people understand. And it's like, when a person, that's why faith is so important, because faith allows you to accept some things that there's just no answer for.
Right.
Yeah.
But God has it in his hands.
So to circle back,
Thank you.
yeah, to get the second part of my question, because I'm not going to say that you did not answer the first part of the question thoroughly, because you did. The Bay Area now, what is that? Let me put it to you this way. You would let me, when I was in high school, you would allow me to go with friends, just friends in high school, to the BayArea. Just to go, hey, we're heading to the Bay Area. Would you allow Savannah with a guard dog and a bodyguard and the Secret Service? No. Please tell us, what is the Bay Area today?
It's horrible. It's a cesspool. I mean, before, the boys would run around the neighborhood and hang out or whatnot. I can't let my daughter do that now. And it's pretty sad. And then it's like, even when my daughter goes somewhere with friends or whatnot, I'm constantly looking at my GPS.
Right.
Making sure I know exactly where she is.
Yeah.
So it's pretty sad that the state of California has allowed our cities to become what they are today. we live in probably one of the most conservative areas in California. And we love the weather. We love our area. We love our little neighborhood that we live in because we live around a bunch of people who are homeowners, who take care of their houses, who, like I got people who, my neighbor across the street is a Christian. I had a guy move in right next door to them who are Christians who I invited to church, and now they attend our church.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Right.
Or, I live across, I live right next door to a guy who was Muslim, and, and walks outside and say, "Hey, brother, how you doing? God bless you." You know what I mean? And my neighbor's behind me. You know what I mean? And I mean, and we love our neighborhood.
Well, let me ask you this, because I've heard some people say this. Would you? Because we've always, every election, we've got the same argument. But would you agree with the assessment that California is one of the best arguments for the Electoral College?
Yes.
Yeah, there's too many people there who vote surprisingly blue. It's the common denominator that I see my parents now congregating to certain people are it's like a Abbasid on Ab and Preach. They pay taxes. At some point you stop hanging around people who are just kind of not contributing to society in multiple ways. I still stand by taxation is theft, but the idea that you can have a society that allows people to have their I'm going to be scientific as I can, fecal matter just strewn about the roads. I mean, how many times I remember the first time I ever went to a Raider game while they were still in Oakland. Rest in peace. And me and my brothers woke up in the back of the Suburban, and Mom and Dad are super excited. And we're like, "Where are we going?" "We're going to a Raider game." We go to the Raider game. It was super fun. Everybody was crazy. I mean, Raider fans are crazy, so it's whatever. But, I enjoyed that. The first time I ever went to a Giants game by myself with a bunch of friends, I hate the Giants, but it was fun. We went to the Bay Area. What's that pier that you and Mom?
39.
Pier 39 was the place.
Spot.
Yeah, was the spot.
Yeah.
And then you go get a bread bowl.
Yeah.
You go get now. You can't wear open-toed shoes. You can't. You shouldn't wear shorts. You honestly need a hazmat suit to get around because, man, taking the BART in high school. You drive to Dublin. You get on the BART and you go into the city. So much fun. Right. Now, forget about it.
You can't even drive your car down into San Francisco anymore. I mean, just about everyone that goes down to San Francisco will get their car broken into. You park in the areas of just going down to Pier 39 or certain areas in San Francisco. It's just, it's just ridiculous.
I remember the last time I was out there was 2005, and I remember some people were saying, and I went to San Francisco, and I remember then people were, things really started to seem like they were ramping up in that direction then.
Oh, yeah.
And, my dad would always, you've heard my dad. My dad is an evangelist, and he would travel out there. As a matter of fact, in the 1960s, he was stationed in Fort Ord, California, which I don't think is a military fort anymore. But he worked at a church out there as the youth pastor while at that time. And California was always, it really was top of his list to go preach. He would go out there. When it would start getting into the fall of the year here, he'd go out there and he would stay booked up throughout the fall and most of the winter. And at one point wanted to move out there. And it is sad to see what they have allowed the state to become.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's there's so many things, but you're going, look, at the end of the day, it's like, when do you start seeing, and not so much just to get political, but it's like, when do you start seeing, when do people start seeing, hey, it's these policies that are not working for us, it's not just that's not a racial or a cultural thing as much as it's just people going, well, the government's here to help.
It's not, but I don't think that it's about the policies in California.
Really?
I don't think it's about the policies, and they've proven that time and time again. For the most part, to be honest with you, I just think that they feel like, regardless of what Republican Party that would ever come into California, would do more damage than what's already there.
Why do you think that?
Well, I think that they feel like the Democratic Party is just for them. Like they continue to help us.
Yeah.
When they're not helping.
Right.
They're not helping at all. With I mean, when you legalize drugs and you say, you know what, not only are we going to legalize it, but we're going to set up stations where you can come and do it safely. You know what I mean? Where okay, so we're going to set up these buildings and we're going to set up these places where you can come, you can stick a needle in your arm.
Yeah.
And you won't get in trouble for it.
Right.
You know what I mean? So, I mean, as far as I know, the society that we kind of grew up in when I was really young, you couldn't do that, and our society was way better. And so now they're allowing you to do that, and our society is way worse, but yet they don't want to change it.
Right.
Because, the Republican Party is going to take control, and they're going to make us do this and make us do that. And it's like, and like you said, politics, everyone has their own opinion. But it's in California, it really has hurt society so much to the point where if we're sitting here talking about this now, and we're sitting here watching, these big companies move out of your area, don't you think you got a problem?
Yeah.
When Walmart, one of the biggest retail companies in the world that could sustain huge financial losses, decide to say, you know what? We're not going to sustain that kind of loss any longer in this area.
Yeah, and they've shut stores down in Washington State, and what do you say? Because what do you say when in 2020, then candidate Biden says, if you don't vote Democrat, you're not black.
Yeah, that one.
You are the only person from your side of the family who didn't vote Democrat, correct?
Yeah. I get made fun of a lot from some of my family members just because I vote the way that I vote, and I'm like, but look, here's my argument. As long as these people are in office, do you realize how much taxes I pay? And it is ridiculous.
Yeah.
I mean, absolutely ridiculous.
It's not just taxes though either. It's where those taxes go to. Yeah. Would you be a little? Nobody likes paying taxes. I'm not going to try to fight for taxes. If those taxes weren't going to things that you didn't. I'm not going to say you don't care about lives being lost in different countries, but, if our boys aren't on the ground fighting, what's the point of sending our taxes somewhere that we're not risking our lives for? Would you be more inclined to, if those taxes were building up the society in the United States?
Absolutely. I would rather all of our tax money that we keep sending to all these other countries and everywhere else to be dealt with. I mean, we have a crisis right in California alone. And that's just one state.
Right.
We're not even talking about Portland and all these other states that have almost the exact same, if not worse, areas than we do.
Yeah.
So, I mean, the homelessness. I mean, we got homeless people living on freeways. I mean, literally. I mean, if I go down the road and some car spins out and goes off the road, it has the probability of killing someone living on the side of the freeway.
Oh, yeah.
We just had that happen a couple of months ago right here.
Yeah.
At the corner of the street, an 18-wheeler just ran the guy over.
Yeah, were you talking about the hobo camps?
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. You mentioned the poverty. If you don't mind, I have a question from my younger brother, Jalen.
Oh, no. Go ahead.
He has a question. He had a couple of questions. But this one's for you, Jalen. He was asking about, how does your worldview shape on the idea of children in poverty and who seem to only have the choice of dealing drugs? What is your take on that?
I don't think that's the only choice you have. I mean, the problem is that we don't have programs. We don't have areas in some of those. We don't have situational things for those people to do. A lot of people to do in those areas. You know what I mean? growing up, we did have YMCAs. We had YMCAs. You had all these community, centers and things like that. You go take a walk into LA now. You see YMCAs turned into, outlets.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You see all these other different programs. Because I'm be honest with you, because when I was in prison, California a while back used to be rehabilitation centers when you went to prison. All right, they were rehabilitation centers. But as the state has moved on, they went away from rehabilitation centers. And so they're not helping people when they get out. Because when I was in there, I worked in a metal fab shop. And one of the things that I remember is, and that's just not just in prison, but I'm just in society in general, they're doing the same exact thing. When I was in there, I worked in a metal fab shop. And I remember one of the things that I came across was the fact that I got up every single day for almost 2 years, got up every single day, went into this metal fab shop, and worked in a paint booth, painting or, putting these cabinets and desks and all this stuff together in Avenal. And then one of the things that I realized is that if I can do that here, and why can I do this when I get out?
Mm-hmm.
And that was a big push for me.
Yeah.
And so when these guys don't have a lot of this opportunities, when they're in these different little cities, I mean, even in schools, that's where we got to start at, in schools. When I was in school, we had shops. We had metal shop, we had wood shop, we had all this. You don't have that in a lot of these schools in those areas anymore. Mm-hmm. So these guys don't have an area where they a trade or something like that they can say, oh, you know what, I want to get into that.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And another big thing is the fact that we don't push education like we used to.
Absolutely.
Education has taken a drop, whereas for me, myself, and my boys can attest to this, it was like, hey, you know what? We know that college ain't for everyone.
Right.
You know what I mean? I mean, hey, go to college, go get your job, go get your degree and go do the what. But if you can't do that, there are plenty of trades out here. And I used to push the pipe fitters union because I worked with those guys, and it was ridiculous. It pushed the pipe fitters union like it was the thing going out of style.
Well, and you said something, and then the group that you said was going around that you got the books from, and kind of what I picked up from that is that they were really that sounds like that's kind of where you realized, or they really showed you a lot of it's a lot based on personal responsibility. Yeah. And so you realize, hey, okay, and you said, if I can do this here, then why can't I do this when I get out into society?
Yeah.
I did some jail ministry back in Nashville, and one of the things I found out about a lot of those guys in there is they would go in during the winter and spend the whole winter to stay warm, and then right as the fall would come around, they'd go commit some crime. And so instead of going, hey, I'm going to, not that prison is a place to, but you used it to learn something that would help you once you got outside. And kind of what you're talking about, if that's your only choice. But then you mentioned the word options. You have to look for those options.
Well, I think looking for the options is one thing. The question that, and I'm texting my brothers in a group chat because they would love to ask questions. We're going to get the whole family on the podcast one day, I promise. We're going to get all the mics, and all the brothers are going to sit here, and Thomas isn't going to know what to do with himself. But it was talking about children, and I think what you mentioned was something that I fall under the umbrella of everybody has a choice. And part of it for children is that they don't know what they don't know. And something I do here at the church is we had a young man named Daniel. He's going off to the military. Great young man. And other than school, he'd just go home. And so what I told him was, hey, Saturdays, the church will pay you. It wasn't like they were paying him like some crazy salary. It was like, hey, here's $20 mow the lawn. And he did it very, very well. And he mastered it. He made sure he did it right. And something I noticed is that young men especially, because I can't speak for women. I'm not one. Surprise, surprise. young men just want a purpose.
Right.
Whether that's being the next Jeff Bezos,
Uh-huh.
hey, by all means, have ambition, do that. Or if it's just the next pipe fitter, like you said, these things, if we can meet the young men, I would go on to say, just to add on to your answer, my addendum would be, the church needs to do their darn to go out and show that there's another choice, whether it's, hey, why don't you come fellowship with us and we'll help you find something, or giving them something to do, like clean up the church or learn how to work sound, learn how to do whatever it is. We are around that 5-minute mark I usually give Thomas, but by all means,
it's fun.
I had I had one more question, and this one's for Mom. What is it that gets you up in the morning? What is it that, because we don't, I don't think I asked too many men this, but what is it as a man that gets you up in the morning to keep doing what you do, to keep being that man of God that you so want to be, that you show every day?
I think it's purpose. God has given me a purpose to become the best human being and person that I could possibly be from where I came from. And the biggest thing was to show you guys that no matter what, you get up in the morning, you go to work. And, I got up in the morning, drove an hour and a half, 2 hours to work every day and back for years. And I still do it from time to time now. But that's another thing that, that's another thing that I feel like we're missing in this society, is positive role model for men.
Yeah.
And so when I'm talking about those places like the Y and the places, that's where young men usually would go to basically find those role models.
Right.
Because the men that show up there to be able to play or guide or direct or teach those young men are there. And even, hey, grab those young men from time to time when they get ready to go this way or go that way and pull them back a little bit. And that's what we're lacking in this society, especially in the community of black folks.
Well, I listened to an interview this week, and it was a guy who was, he was like one of the top porn actors for 6 years, so from like 2012 to 2006. And he got to the point where he was on the verge of committing suicide. And he said that he went home after filming this film, and he had done his research and had this concoction of pills, getting ready to take them. And he said, I felt something in my pocket. And he said, normally I'd never pay attention to this. And he said, I put my hand in my pocket, pulled it out, and it was a check for the film he had just done. And he said, I thought, okay, once I commit suicide, all my money is going to go to my mom or my brother. So I'll take it down to the bank, I'll deposit it, and then I'll come back and do this. And he said, I take it down to the bank, and he said, the lady that was working there called me by my name and said, Joshua, are you doing okay? And so when she did that, because he said, I never went by my real name. He said, I always went by my pseudonym. And so when she did that, it kind of jarred me, because I was going, hey, wait a minute. There is more value to me.
Yeah. And
so it made him reconsider. Well, long story short, he ends up moving back home and getting involved in a church. And he said, and even still yet, of course, apparently even his, the stuff that he did is still out there.
Yeah.
And he said a lot of people, he went home, became a certified trainer. And he said there were people within the gym that were like, I don't want to work out with this guy. I don't want him training me. But God began to give him mercy and grace through all of that as he began to seek God and begin to live for God. And then he met his wife, and he said, I almost didn't tell her what I did, but he said, I heard my mom's voice in my head saying, no, you do not lie to her. And he said, I just laid it all out. And said her first question was, well, excuse me, and said, oh, well, what, basically just had a general conversation. And then time went on, and they got married. Now they have 3 children. He went to Liberty University, completed a degree, and is now pastoring a church. And he said, the unfortunate thing is that most of that material is still out on the internet. But when people come up to him, Now he's able to say, yeah, that was my former life, but let me tell you what God can do.
What God has done.
You know, so it's a lot of times there may be things that we're going, man, I wished I had not have done that. But if we allow God, God can use that to, you know, as Joseph would say, you know, what you intended for evil, God meant for good to the saving of many.
Yeah.
And so we don't know, and that's why I love doing this podcast, because of interviews like this that we can go, there is always hope in God.
100%. We
Absolutely.
my family lives and breathes the Serenity Prayer, and a lot of what my mom has done for all of us, my dad, my brothers, my sister, what my mom has done has been that spiritual prayer warrior. You know, and I'm probably going to tell her this today. I know that my mom does her best.
Mm.
And it's proof in my dad, because the way I tell you, he was saying it earlier, and I was chuckling. He said even when they were divorced, my mom was still diligently praying, and my mom would come home and say, she'd be crying, but she'd say, I was praying for your dad. I hope your dad's okay. I hope your dad's fine. Not one moment in their divorce was I surprised that dad was coming over to hang out with mom.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, they still loved each other. And my mom was steadfast in her faith. And this interview couldn't be done without God's intervention. But it also couldn't have been done without my mom praying and being diligent, because somebody had faith the size of a mustard seed. And she moved a mountain that is not only moving to this day through her marriage and the way she's bringing up my sister, but also with me and my wife, and there is a grandchild on the way, and it is exciting. And so this has been,
Yes, it is.
I'm biased. I'm obviously biased, but this has been my favorite exchange to have, and it's been a blessing to have my father here. I can't wait to have you back. And like I said, you'll probably see all my brothers eventually.
Bring them on.
So
Might have to get a bigger Focusrite.
well, we'll probably have to get a bigger one. But ladies and gentlemen, we hope you guys enjoy your weekend. If you are in the Conway area, starting tomorrow and going through the next few Sundays, we are going to have a revival here at Convergent City Church here in Conway, and we want you all to join us. We love each and every one of you. Thank you for listening. Please stay safe, and God bless.